Have you ever noticed that most people live like highly intelligent hamsters? Shiny wheels, motivating goals, quotes on the mirror, and they run and run and run. And at the end of the day, guess what? They're in the exact same place. And the funniest or saddest part? They think the problem is motivation. If only I felt like it. If I woke up inspired, if the universe aligned for me, please. If the universe were really conspiring in your favor, it would have mailed you a planner by now. Pay attention to me right now because I'm about to tell you something that might annoy you. And if it does, even better. The problem isn't you. The problem is you were trained to think like a romantic from the last century, not like someone who's actually responsible for their own life. Goals, ambitions, dreams, beautiful things, until reality shows up. You come home tired, open your phone for 5 minutes, blink, and suddenly you've spent 3 hours scrolling and watching TV. Picture your mind as a laboratory, and there you are with a lab coat, goggles, and a sign that says, Project, Change My Life. But all you've got is a weak battery called motivation, winning sometimes and betraying you the rest of the time. It would be funny if it weren't exactly what's stopping you from becoming who you could be. Now, a little mental experiment. If I give you a simple task, say, study for 30 minutes a day, how many days do you actually do it? 3? 2? None, because you swore you'd start on Monday? So let me ask you, if your success depends only on your willpower, are you really okay with that? Because honestly, I wouldn't be. The human mind wasn't built to obey vague promises like, I'm going to be disciplined. It was built to save energy, cheat, complain, create genius excuses, and then act surprised when nothing changes. So let's play a different, more honest game. If you can't rely on motivation, how on earth are you going to win? The answer, my friend, is not feeling more motivated. It's building systems. Minds that work even when you don't want to. Routines that carry you when your body wants a permanent vacation. And you'll discover that freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's building a brain that takes you where you want to go, even when you'd rather stay on the couch searching for the meaning of life and cat video. Take a deep breath. This journey is going to poke your comfort zone. But in the end, you won't depend on motivation. You'll depend on you. Do you know where most people fail? They confuse intention with transformation. They think deciding to change is already halfway there. No, my friend. Deciding to change is just the ticket to the show. The band hasn't even stepped on stage yet. It's like saying you're going to learn piano and feeling emotionally fulfilled just because you bought the piano. The instrument is right there, beautiful, shiny. And you? Shiny too, but from frustration. Now listen closely, because this is worth a fortune. When you set goals without mechanisms, you're reciting poetry to the universe. And the universe does not pay bills with poetry. Imagine someone saying, I'm going to study every day after work. Sounds great, right? Sounds mature, determined, evolved. But then the day comes. Traffic, fatigue, family, dinner, one video, one more video. Just one little episode before starting. And poof! The plan disappears like an electron in superposition, and then the internal performance begins. Seriously? Again? I promised. Ah yes, promises. That magical fuel of human fantasy. Now pay attention. You didn't fail because you're weak. You failed because you're trying to fight physics, biology, and psychology at the same time. Your brain wasn't designed to honor intentions. It was designed to avoid effort. Think of it like this. You're trying to fly a NASA rocket with the same operating system that kept your ancestors alive in caves. Your brain would rather save energy to escape an imaginary tiger than learn accounting, read a book, study physics, or go to the gym. So why blame yourself? The system is working perfectly. It's just working for survival. And you want excellence. And here's the twist. Excellence doesn't come from I want to. Excellence comes from I'll make this inevitable. How? By building pathways so well designed that even your lazy self can walk them. Because the right question isn't, how do I motivate myself? The right question is, how do I make motivation irrelevant? Master that, and you control your life. Fail at that, and you become a hostage to your mood, your energy, your feelings of the day. Do you want to be the pilot or the passenger? Hoping the pilot wakes up inspired. Breathe. Get ready. Because now we're going to dismantle your mind. and rebuild it into a machine that works for you, not against you. Ready for the next part? Then make sure to leave your like to support our work and help us create even more content like this. Your support truly fuels this journey. Thank you. Life isn't a contest of who feels more motivated. If it were, all you'd need is coffee, epic background music, and boom, instant Nobel Prize. But reality plays by different rules. You don't win when you feel like it. You win when you build a structure where feeling like it isn't required. Think of it like this. If you need inspiration to move, your life is a sailboat. Beautiful, romantic, and completely useless without emotional wind. I prefer an engine. And do you know what the engine of a well-lived life is? Systems. But relax. When I say system, I don't mean boring corporate jargon. I mean an elegant way to outsmart your own biology. Look, when you say, I'm going to read every day, that's intention. When you say, I'm going to read every day at 8 p.m., with the book already open on the table and my phone in another room, that's a system. Is the difference small? Yes, but it's as small as the space between failure and progress. And that tiny space is where life changes. Pay attention. An effective system assumes you'll fail, that you'll get tired, that you'll get lazy, that you'll come up with brilliant excuses, worthy of an award in creativity, and it still works. That's why this is almost poetic. Real power isn't being perfect, it's being strategically imperfect. Imagine this for a moment. You wake up with zero motivation, none, a grumpy Feynman living inside your body, and still you move forward. Because your life doesn't depend on your mood. It depends on how you structured yourself when you were sober from emotions. Here's a quick test. Answer with brutal honesty. If tomorrow you woke up with absolutely no motivation, would you still move even a little toward your goals? Even tired, irritated, drained? If the answer is no, or it depends, you don't have a system. You have hope dressed as discipline. And hope is beautiful, but terrible as a strategy. You know what's better? Creating conditions where even your lazy version makes progress. That, my friend, is behavioral engineering. It's the science of personal freedom. It's when life stops being a motivational drama and becomes a laboratory of inevitable growth. Take a deep breath. You can already feel the shift happening. But now comes the beautiful part, where you actually learn to hack yourself and build a mind that wins even while sleeping. Let's agree on something. If your brain were always on your side, you'd already be a millionaire, fluent in 3 languages, with visible abs and meditating at 5 a.m. But no, sometimes it acts like an anxious intern with attention issues and unlimited access to social media. And then you blame yourself. You feel weak, when really, you're just using emotional tools to fight biological mechanisms. So let's flip this game. But before we move on, look at me for a moment, because what I'm about to give you may be the moment your life actually changes. In the next few minutes, I'm going to lay out step by step the mental structure that makes discipline inevitable. So make a deal with me right now. Stay until the end, because if you leave halfway, you'll go right back to the same fight. But if you stay, you'll walk out with the blueprint that changes everything. But before I give you the full structure, you need to understand this. First, think like a physicist looks at the world. He doesn't try to convince the apple to fall. He builds laws, observes patterns, and uses gravity in his favor. Human behavior has laws too, and one of them is simple. What is easy to do, you will do. What is hard, you will avoid. Always. So the trick isn't being strong. It's making the right path the easiest one, and the wrong path nearly impossible. Want to read more? Leave the book open on the table and your phone far away. Want to train? Clothes ready, shoes visible. Fixed schedule, gym nearby. Want to study? Short sessions, clear goals, clean environment, distractions gone. You don't control your emotions, but you control your environment. And whoever controls the environment controls the behavior. Now, a gentle provocation, or not so gentle depending on your mood today. When was the last time you prepared the path for your strongest self, instead of hoping it would magically appear? Do you really think great minds wake up every day with angels whispering, "Let's conquer the world, champ"? Please. Even Einstein needed coffee. What separates winners from complainers is simple. They know human nature doesn't change through desire. It changes through architecture. Now close your eyes. Well, metaphorically, keep watching the video. Picture your tomorrow. Not 5 years from now, tomorrow. Waking up, moving, doing the right thing. Not because divine motivation struck you, but because you made the right choice, the obvious one. That, Mike, is real freedom. Not depending on the emotion of the day, but on the design of your mind. And now that you're starting to see this, it's time to go deeper into the subtle art of turning friction, laziness, and inner chaos into a system that works for you, not against you. Breathe. Your brain is being rewired as you hear this. Let's continue. We're entering the territory where most people quit, not because it's impossible, but because they mistake discomfort for failure. Let me ask you something. When you start changing a habit, why do you think your brain complains? Because it hates you? Because you were born undisciplined? Or because life is unfair only to you? None of that. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from the unknown effort. It thinks, work today? Spend energy on this? What if a tiger shows up later? Better save glucose. The tiger doesn't exist anymore, but your operating system never got the memo. So when you feel laziness, doubt, resistance, that's not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're updating the software. And every update has bugs before it becomes stable. The problem is people expect to feel ready. They want change without discomfort, as if life had a no-friction mode, like a video game on easy. But look around. Nothing extraordinary is born from comfort. The butterfly needs the struggle to fly. Muscle only grows when challenged. The brain only evolves when pushed beyond automatic patterns. And here's something that might set you free forever. The pain of discipline is lighter than the pain of staying the same. Does change hurt? Yes, but it hurts far more to live a life below your potential. It hurts to wake up and realize the version of you that lives in your imagination is still tracked in your plans. And I know you feel that, deep down, in the silence before sleep, when no one's watching, and you wonder, am I really becoming who I can be? That thought hurts, and that pain is precious. It's the fuel to break inertia. Now imagine this with me, just for a moment. You wake up tomorrow, and instead of negotiating with your mind like a tired politician, you just do. No drama, no inner debate, no existential soap opera. You do it because you became someone who does, because the system is already running, because you're no longer a spectator of your own brain. You became its engineer. Systems don't remove effort, they remove uncertainty. And uncertainty is what paralyzes 99% of people. If all you had to do was wake up and follow a clear plan without depending on mood, without depending on the emotional weather of the day, how much further would you be in 6 months, 1 year? Stop and imagine it. Feel it. Your future self is looking at you right now, asking, are you going to keep relying on motivation or build the mind that wins every time? If that question stung, good. That means your awareness is waking up. Let's keep going, because now we enter the stage where change becomes real and your identity starts aligning with your destiny. Have you ever noticed that life doesn't change when you make big declarations, but when small actions repeat long enough that people can't even recognize the old you anymore? The problem is people expect a grand moment of enlightenment. That movie scene where everything suddenly makes sense. The sky opens, the music plays, and you become a disciplined monk overnight. Hate to break it to you, that's not happening. Life doesn't transform in an epic explosion. It changes in silence, in the ordinary, in that tiny choice no one sees, the one you repeat 1,000,000 times until it becomes part of who you are. And listen, I'm not talking about becoming some miserable robot that only works. Quite the opposite. I'm talking about real freedom. When you build systems, the world doesn't control you anymore. Your mood doesn't control you, your past doesn't control you, your impulses don't control you. You choose, for real. And then, guess what? Life starts feeling light. Yes, light. Because discipline isn't the prison. Lack of discipline is. People without systems are always tired, always frustrated, always trying to get back on track, like an old computer freezing with 1,000 tabs open. Now imagine a mind that runs like a finely tuned machine. You wake up and your day already has rails. You move forward, maybe slowly, but forward. No daily civil war in your head, because you stopped forcing your brain to decide everything and let it simply execute. And here's the beautiful twist. When you do this, the motivation you used to chase desperately comes back naturally. Because motivation doesn't come from intention, it comes from progress. Think for a second. How many times have you felt incredibly motivated simply because you were seeing results? You don't need motivation to start. You need a system. And the system, through some divine or scientific irony, ends up creating motivation later. But listen closely. You're not just building habits. You're building identity. Identity doesn't change when you say, "I want to." It changes when you prove to yourself again and again, "I am the kind of person who follows through." Today, you might be full of doubt. That's okay. Doubt doesn't stop you. Paralysis does. And guess what the antidote to paralysis is? Consistent action. Even tiny action. Look at you right now. You're here, absorbing this, feeling something waking up inside you. A mix of discomfort and excitement. Like a bigger version of you knocking on your present self saying, "Open up. It's time." So do it. Open. Take a deep breath, because the next part is where everything clicks, where your system stops being theory and becomes a living engine inside you. Now, if you've made it this far, you're about to learn the difference between trying to win and making victory inevitable. People don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they depend on willpower. And willpower is like that guest who promises to stay just one day and disappears exactly when you need them the most. So let's build something more reliable than motivation. A smart, human, almost unbreakable system. Picture yourself building a bridge to your future. Not a magical bridge held up by hope, but a solid one with pillars and psychological concrete. How do we start? First principle, choose one anchor goal. Just one. None of this doing everything at once like an anxious octopus. Ask yourself, if I make consistent progress on this one thing, does my whole life improve? It could be health, studying, finances, a project, your channel, your career. Chosen? Good. Now let's build the path so this goal survives even on your laziest days. Second principle, map reality, not fantasy. List with almost uncomfortable honesty what you've already tried, where you fell, what slows you down, when you procrastinate, why you quit. Not to judge yourself, but to be a scientist of your own behavior. Your brain is not your enemy. It's just overdoing its job of saving energy. So we'll train it gently, strategically. Third principle, turn intention into mechanism. Intention is, I'm going to read more. Mechanism is, I will read every day at 8 p.m. sitting at the table with my phone far away and the book already open. See the difference? The brain loves the romantic ambiguity of the first sentence. We will give it the pragmatic clarity of the second. Now the golden secret. The system must work even on your worst day. That means creating flexible versions of the same action. Ideal version, reduced version, minimum version to keep the flame alive. For example, ideal, read 45 minutes. If impossible, read 20 minutes. If still impossible, read 5 pages. You do not fail, you adjust. If even your tired version can do it, you've unlocked a superpower. Fifth principle, favor the correct path. Humans always choose the easiest path, so we make the right path the easiest one. Book already open, workout clothes visible, apps blocked during key hours, water, notes, and materials ready. Don't beat your mind with force, beat it with design. Sixth principle, the first micro-action. Movement begins before movement. Your first daily action should be so small it's ridiculous not to do it. Open the book, put on your shoes, open the project on your computer, set up your desk, 2 minutes to start. The rest builds itself. Seventh principle, systems survive failure. If you're late, do the reduced version. If you failed yesterday, don't do double today. Do simple so your rhythm returns. The system exists to carry you when you can't carry yourself. And while you're doing this, something begins to shift. Without noticing, your mind starts changing. You stop depending on being inspired and start relying on something far more powerful, a new identity being built in silence. Now you are not someone who tries to be disciplined. You are becoming someone who is consistent. And that, my friend, changes everything. Now that the bridge is standing, it's time to reinforce the structure so it lasts a lifetime. The goal here isn't just progress. It's evolving with grace, intelligence, and peace of mind. Let's continue the story. First move, the weekly review that sharpens your mind. Pick a day, for example, Sunday morning. Sit calmly and ask, what worked this week? Where was there friction? What can I make simpler? What can I automate? Adjust one thing per week, just one. Small adjustments, done patiently, build an extraordinary life. Second move, remove the training wheels when you're ready. Many tools are fantastic in the beginning. Reminders, timers, techniques. But as you evolve, you gradually remove those training wheels and strengthen the real habit. Not because you need to be a hero, but because your system is growing. Third move, focus cycles. Instead of trying to master everything at once, choose 6 to 8 week periods to prioritize one skill or area. During that cycle, everything else runs on a healthy autopilot. This reduces anxiety and increases depth. You progress like a scientist, phase by phase. Fourth move, protect your most valuable energy. Do the most important thing when your mind is fresh. For most people, that means the first hours of the morning. Not a spiritual rule, biology. Your brain gives you only a few hours of peak performance each day. Use them to build your future, not to put out fires in your present. Fifth move, the recovery ritual. Great systems don't just produce, they recover. Sleep, conscious pauses, moments of creative idleness. Productivity isn't a sprint. It's a marathon with controlled breathing. Sixth move, treat failures as data, not drama. Missed a day? Observe, learn, adjust, continue. Don't punish yourself. Guilt destroys momentum. Curiosity restores it. Feynman would say, don't waste time defending your ego. Defend your progress. Seventh move, celebrate the simple. Each completed day is a victory. Don't wait for the trophy to acknowledge yourself. Life changes when you learn to love the process, because the process is where your future is built. In the end, understand this. The person capable of achieving great dreams isn't the one with the most emotion, but the one with the emotional and operational structure to move forward every single day. You're not training actions, you're training an identity, an unshakable identity. And when that happens, success stops being an event and becomes a consequence. Now comment below this sentence to lock it into your mind once and for all. My consistency matters more than my motivation. This will force your brain to understand that we must keep acting, keep moving, keep showing up, even without motivation. Don't forget to leave a like to support our research and work. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapters of this mental build journey. Thank you for watching till the end. Take care, and see you in the next video.
What if the reason you hate learning isn't because your brain is lazy, but because you've been forcing it to work against its nature? Most people spend years trying to make themselves interested in things they should learn. They sit down with textbooks, tell themselves to focus, and wonder why their minds keep wandering. They assume learning is supposed to feel like discipline, like lifting weights for the mind. But there's something fundamentally wrong with this picture. The brain doesn't need to be forced to love learning. It already does. Watch a child spend hours figuring out how a door latch works, or how to stack blocks higher without them falling. Nobody taught them to be curious about these things. Nobody rewarded them for caring. They simply encountered a puzzle, and their minds locked onto it like a magnet. The question isn't how to make your brain love learning. The question is, what are you doing that's killing this natural drive? Here's the uncomfortable truth. When people say they hate learning, what they actually hate is the feeling of information sliding off their minds like water off glass. They hate reading a page and realizing they absorbed nothing. They hate sitting in lectures where words turn into noise. And so they conclude that they're not good at learning, or that certain subjects just aren't for them. But this has nothing to do with their capability. It has everything to do with a fundamental misunderstanding about how understanding actually works. Think about the last time something genuinely fascinated you. Maybe it was figuring out how a car engine works, or understanding why certain chess moves are brilliant, or getting lost in how ancient civilizations built their temples. Notice what happened in your mind. You weren't just passively receiving information, you were actively grappling with it. You were asking questions, even if silently. You were trying to predict what comes next. You were noticing contradictions and trying to resolve them. Your brain was doing something, not just absorbing. Now compare that to how most people approach learning. They open a textbook and start reading. They attend a lecture and start listening. They assume their job is to transfer information from the page or the speaker into their memory, like pouring water from one container to another. And this is precisely where everything breaks down, because the brain doesn't work like an empty container waiting to be filled. It works like a living thing that grows by wrestling with its environment. Let me show you what happens when you try to learn passively. Imagine someone reads you a paragraph about how electricity works. You hear the words. You might even understand each sentence as it passes by. But 5 minutes later, if someone asks you to explain it, you find yourself grasping at shadows. The information never actually became part of you. It just moved through your awareness like scenery passing by a train window. You were present, but you weren't engaged in the kind of mental activity that builds understanding. Here's the key principle that changes everything. The brain only truly learns what it has to actively reconstruct, not what it hears, not what it reads. What it builds for itself, piece by piece, through its own effort. This isn't a metaphor. This is how the neural machinery actually operates. When you passively receive information, you're using one set of mental processes. When you actively try to figure something out, you engage an entirely different system, one that forms lasting connections and genuine understanding. So what does this mean practically? It means you need to transform every learning situation into a problem-solving situation. Before you read about how something works, you should wonder how it might work. Before you study a solution, you should struggle with the problem. Before you accept an explanation, you should notice what puzzles you about it. This sounds simple, but it requires a complete reversal of how most people approach learning. Let's take a concrete example. Suppose you need to understand how levers work. The typical approach is to read the explanation, look at the diagrams, memorize the principle that force times distance on one side equals force times distance on the other side. Maybe you can even solve some textbook problems by plugging numbers into the formula. But do you really understand it? Here's a test. Can you explain why a long lever is stronger than a short one without using any equations? Can you predict what would happen with a lever that has uneven thickness? Can you figure out whether it would be easier to lift a rock with the fulcrum close to you or close to the rock? If you can't answer these immediately, it's not because levers are complicated. It's because you never actually built an understanding of levers in your mind. You only memorized facts about levers. And facts without understanding are like having a map of a city you've never visited. You know where things are supposed to be, but you can't actually navigate. Now here's how you would approach the same topic differently. Before reading anything, you would play with the idea. You would imagine pushing down on a seesaw and think about what determines how much force you need. You would picture trying to pry open a stuck door and wonder why a longer stick helps more than a shorter one. You would make predictions, even wrong ones. You would confuse yourself with edge cases. Only then would you look at the explanation, not as truth delivered from above, but as someone else's solution to the same puzzles you've been wrestling with. This completely changes the experience. When you read the explanation now, you're not passively receiving it. You're testing it against your own thinking. You're seeing where it confirms your intuitions and where it surprises you. You're noticing what it clarifies and what it leaves mysterious. The information doesn't just sit in your memory. It connects to a whole web of active thinking you've already done. It becomes part of how you see the world. This principle applies to everything, but people resist it for a simple reason. It feels inefficient. Why should you waste time wondering about something when you could just read the answer? Why struggle when you could simply be told? This is the trap. It feels like struggling with a problem before seeing the solution is extra work. But it's not extra work. It's the only work that actually produces understanding. Everything else is just the illusion of learning. Think about what happens in a typical classroom. A teacher explains a concept clearly. The students nod along. Everything makes sense while it's being explained. But the next day, when they try to use that concept on their own, they discover they can't. They understood the explanation, but they never developed the ability to think with the idea. Understanding someone else's reasoning and being able to reason for yourself are completely different things. The brain needs to fail before it can succeed. It needs to wonder before it can comprehend. It needs to be confused before clarity means anything. When you shortcut this process by going straight to the answer, you're not saving time. You're guaranteeing that you'll have to relearn the same thing again and again because it never properly took root the first time. Here's another layer to this. The act of struggling to understand something does more than help you learn that particular thing. It trains your mind to become a better learning machine in general. Every time you face confusion and push through it, you're building mental tools that work across every domain. You're learning how to notice what you don't understand, how to break complex things into simpler pieces, how to test your understanding against reality, how to recognize when an explanation is genuinely clear versus when it's just confident-sounding nonsense. These meta skills are more valuable than any particular fact you might learn, because facts become outdated or irrelevant, but the ability to grapple with new ideas, to teach yourself, to think clearly about unfamiliar subjects, this stays with you. And you can't develop it by passively consuming information. You can only develop it by repeatedly placing yourself in situations where you have to figure things out. Now, let's talk about why this makes learning actually enjoyable instead of tedious. Remember, the brain is naturally curious, but curiosity isn't triggered by being told answers. It's triggered by encountering mysteries. When you approach learning by first wondering, by first trying to figure things out, you're activating that natural curiosity. Your mind becomes engaged not because you're forcing it to be interested, but because you've given it something it instinctively wants to do: solve puzzles. This is why children learn so naturally. They don't separate learning from playing. They encounter something puzzling. They mess around with it. They form theories. They test them. They update their understanding. It's all one continuous process of active engagement. Somewhere along the way, formal education convinced us that real learning means sitting still, absorbing information, and proving we remember it. But this is almost the opposite of how the mind actually builds understanding. Let's apply this to reading a difficult book. Most people open the book and start at page 1, reading linearly, trying to absorb each section before moving to the next. They treat the book like medicine, something to be taken in prescribed doses. But think about what happens when you read this way. You encounter a difficult idea, you don't quite grasp it, but you keep reading because you don't want to fall behind. You tell yourself you'll understand it later. The difficult idea becomes one of many things you're sort of following but not really grasping. Now, imagine a different approach. You open the book, but instead of reading to absorb, you're reading to notice what puzzles you. When you hit something you don't understand, you stop. You don't keep reading. You engage with the confusion. You try to articulate exactly what doesn't make sense. You flip back to earlier sections. You think about whether the author's claim could be wrong, or whether you're missing something. You try to explain the idea to yourself in simpler terms. Only when you've genuinely worked through the difficulty do you continue. This might mean you read 10 pages in the time most people read 50, but those 10 pages actually become part of how you think. The other approach gives you the comforting feeling of progress, but when the book is finished, almost nothing remains. You can't explain the key ideas. You can't use them in new situations. You just have a vague memory of having read about them. The same applies to mathematics. People think they're bad at mathematics because they get lost in the symbols and procedures. But the problem isn't the mathematics itself. The problem is treating mathematics as a series of rules to memorize rather than a language for thinking precisely about relationships. When you see an equation, the question isn't, what is the rule for solving this? The question is, what is this equation actually saying about the world? Take something as simple as addition. Children who understand addition don't just know that 3 plus 4 equals 7. They can picture combining groups of things. They can see that the order doesn't matter. They can recognize addition in countless different situations. Children who only memorize that 3 plus 4 equals 7 have just collected a fact. They might even collect hundreds of such facts. But they haven't understood the concept, so when they encounter slightly different situations, they're lost. Every subject works this way. Chemistry isn't about memorizing what happens when you mix certain elements. It's about understanding why atoms behave the way they do, so you can predict what will happen in situations you've never encountered. History isn't about remembering dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that drive human societies, so you can recognize patterns in your own time. Literature isn't about knowing what happens in various books. It's about developing insight into human nature and the power of language. But here's what makes this challenging. When you learn actively, you feel incompetent. You get confused. You make mistakes. You have to revise your understanding. This is uncomfortable. Passive learning feels much more pleasant in the moment. Someone explains something, you follow along, you nod, you feel like you understand. There's no struggle, no confusion, no discomfort. The problem is that this pleasant feeling is completely disconnected from actual learning. The brain only grows when it's pushed beyond its current capabilities. Comfort is the enemy of development. This doesn't mean learning should be miserable, but it does mean the feeling of learning should include some element of struggle, of reaching for something just beyond your current grasp. When everything feels easy and clear, you're not learning. You're just rehearsing what you already know. Think about learning a musical instrument. Nobody becomes a skilled pianist by watching someone else play, no matter how carefully they watch. They have to put their own fingers on the keys. They have to make mistakes and correct them. They have to struggle with coordination until it becomes natural. And notice that this struggle, while challenging, is also engaging. The pianist isn't thinking, "I must force myself to enjoy this." They're absorbed in the puzzle of getting their fingers to do what they want. The enjoyment comes from the engagement itself. This is what learning should feel like across all domains. You're not forcing yourself to be interested. You're genuinely grappling with something, and that active grappling is inherently engaging, even when it's difficult. The problem is that most educational systems remove the grappling part. They give you pre-digested answers and ask you to remember them. This removes both the difficulty and the engagement. You're left with the worst of both worlds, learning that requires discipline but provides no genuine intellectual satisfaction. So how do you practically implement this? You make one simple shift. Before you seek the answer to anything, you make yourself wonder about it. You're about to read a chapter on evolution? First, spend 10 minutes thinking about how you would explain the diversity of life if you had never heard of evolution. What would puzzle you? What would you need to explain? You're about to learn how an engine works? First, think through what would need to happen to convert fuel into motion. Make predictions. Be wrong. Then, when you encounter the actual explanation, you're not just absorbing it, you're comparing it to your own thinking. This works even for subjects that seem purely factual. History, for instance. Before reading about a historical event, think about what you would do if you were in that situation. What constraints would the people have faced? What options would they have had? What consequences would you predict for different choices? Then, when you read what actually happened, you're not just collecting facts. You're understanding why things unfolded that way rather than some other way. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it makes learning self-correcting. When you actively engage with material, you quickly discover what you don't understand. Gaps become obvious, confusions reveal themselves. But when you learn passively, you can maintain the illusion of understanding for a long time, only discovering the problem much later when you try to actually use what you supposedly learned. There's one more crucial element. You need to constantly test your understanding by trying to explain things without looking at your notes or textbooks. Not explain by repeating what you read. Explain in your own words, using your own examples, connecting ideas in your own way. This is terrifying at first, because it reveals how little you actually understood. But this is exactly why it's valuable. Every time you struggle to explain something and realize you can't, you've identified exactly what you need to work on. The mind learns by building models of reality, not by collecting facts, but by constructing mental representations that let you simulate how things work. When you can close your eyes and mentally predict what will happen in a situation you've never encountered, that's when you've truly learned something. And you can't build these models by passively receiving information. You can only build them by actively trying to construct them, testing them against reality, and refining them when they fail. This is why people who truly understand their fields can explain things simply and can answer unexpected questions easily. They're not recalling memorized information, they're reasoning from their models. They understand the territory, not just the map. And anyone can develop this kind of understanding in any field they choose, not by working harder at memorizing, not by forcing themselves to focus, but by transforming their relationship with learning from passive reception to active construction. The brain doesn't need to be forced to love this kind of learning. It already loves it. This is what the brain was built to do: encounter puzzles, wrestle with them, build understanding, and use that understanding to navigate the world more effectively. Every time you approach learning this way, you're working with your nature rather than against it. And what seemed like discipline becomes discovery. What felt like obligation becomes genuine curiosity, not because you've changed what you're learning, but because you've changed how you're learning it.
You could spend 12 hours in the library with a neon yellow highlighter, painting the entire book like it's a coloring book, and I guarantee you, congratulations, you just spent 12 hours doing absolutely nothing but coloring. What separates the genius from the parrot isn't how much they read, nor the magical technique they use to highlight words. The difference lies in what happens inside the black box, right there in the spongy tissue of your brain. Most of you study as if you were stacking bricks in a vacant lot. You pick up a fact, throw it there. Pick up a formula, throw it there. And you expect that magically a house will appear. It's not going to happen. Real learning is architecture, not accumulation. Deep processing is any type of thinking that leads you to form a schema of knowledge, an interconnected network. Think of your memory like a spider web. If you throw a piece of information at it and it doesn't stick to anything, if it stays isolated, floating in a vacuum, guess what your brain does? It throws it out. The brain is absurdly efficient at forgetting what isn't connected. It says, "This is useless. Bye." That's why you read a page, and by the time you get to the bottom, you've already forgotten the top. You did shallow processing. You focused on memorizing, on repeating, on knowing the name. That is isolated learning. The secret to learning faster than everyone else is to force integrated learning. You don't just want to understand the concept, you want to know where it lives, who its neighbors are, and how it compares to the concept down the street. When you try to explain something complex simply, the essence of my favorite technique, you are forcing your brain to do this deep processing. You are creating analogies, comparing and contrasting. So electricity flows like water in a pipe. Bingo! The moment you make that connection, you stopped memorizing and started understanding. You integrated the information into your web, and once it's stuck in the web, connected to other things you already know, the brain protects it like gold. People who do this naturally are the ones you call geniuses or talented, the ones who get high grades without studying as much. But the good news, thanks to neuroplasticity, is that you can train this. It's not genetics, it's habit. So, from now on, I want you to install a radar in your head, an intellectual lie detector. Ask yourself every 5 minutes, is my learning right now isolated or integrated? If you are just trying to memorize the definition, stop. You are digging a hole in water. Change your approach. Ask, how does this look like something I already know? Why is this different from that? Force the connection. Is it uncomfortable? Is it hard? Great! The discomfort is the sound of your neurons lifting weights. If it were easy, you wouldn't be learning. You'd just be strolling. But be careful. Even with deep processing, you can get lost if you don't have a control mechanism, a steering wheel to guide this mental Ferrari. And that is exactly where most people spin out on the curve. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to say might sound like an insult at first glance, but it is the key that unlocks the universe of knowledge. Most of you are doing it wrong. You look at a book, at a formula, at a complex concept, and you think that knowing the name of something is the same as knowing something. It's not. I can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when I'm done, I'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. I'll only know about the humans who named it. To learn for real, to learn fast, to learn in a way that sticks to your mind like gum on a shoe requires something more. It requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop kidding yourself. And the best way to stop kidding yourself is to try to teach what you think you know to someone who knows nothing. Or better yet, to a 5-year-old. If you can't explain it simply, you didn't understand it. Period. Now, imagine with me something that will change the way you face every book, every class, every new intellectual challenge. Imagine there is a secret, not magic, but a method, a sort of algorithm for the brain that allows you to devour information and transform it into deep understanding, not just cheap memorization. This method, my friends, starts with a fundamental shift in your head. The first step isn't opening the book, it's opening the mind. I'm talking about mindset. You see confusion as the enemy. You look at a difficult problem, feel that knot in your stomach, that feeling of, I'm too dumb for this, and you run. Wrong. Confusion is the signal. It is the pain of intellectual growth. If you aren't confused, you aren't learning. You're just reviewing what you already know. People with a fixed mindset look at a mistake and see failure. People who learn fast, who really understand the gears of the world, look at a mistake and see data. They see information. So it's not this way. Interesting. It is this curiosity in the face of error that accelerates learning by 20 times. Yes, 20 times. I'm not the one saying it. The data is. So, the first thing you need to do to master this technique, to learn faster than everyone else, is to embrace the initial stupidity. Accept that you are going to feel like an idiot at the beginning. And guess what? It's wonderful, because that is the moment the magic happens. It's when your brain starts making new connections, neuroplasticity kicks in, breaking and remaking paths. But you have to want this. You have to be willing to look foolish to become a genius. If you are afraid of making mistakes, you've already lost before you started. Learning to learn is absurdly important and absurdly complicated, but it starts with this simple permission, the permission to be wrong. Now, it's no use having the right mindset if you can't even get your butt in the chair. And here we enter the second dimension, something many of you ignore because you think it's stuff for clean freaks, but it's pure physics, self-management. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think you're going to understand quantum mechanics in 30-second bursts, I have bad news. You won't. Deep learning requires a protected environment. It requires you to manage your focus as if it were the scarcest resource on the planet, because it is. You need to identify the chain of events that leads to your distraction. You pick up your phone to check the time, see a notification, click it, and poof, an hour is gone. You need to cut this at the root. Isolate the behavior. Remove the temptation. Create a space where deep study can actually happen. Without this, the technique I'm going to teach you is nothing more than a nice theoretical idea. You need uninterrupted time and attention to truly process the information. And process is the key word here. It's not about reading. Reading is easy. Anyone can read. It's about what your brain does with what you read. And that is where the majority fails miserably. Forget everything you think you know about studying. Seriously, throw it out. Most of you treat the brain like it's a supermarket shopping basket. You walk down the information aisles, grab a fact here, a formula there, throw it all in the basket, and think that when you get to the checkout counter, you've magically become intelligent. Let me tell you a secret. When you get to the checkout counter, the basket has a hole in it. You lost everything on the way. This is what we call shallow processing. You read the words, your eyes moved from left to right, but your brain was in standby mode. Real learning, the kind that sticks, the kind that allows you to solve problems you've never seen before, happens in a different dimension. We call this deep processing, but the fancy name gets in the way. Let's call it what it really is. The art of not letting information die of loneliness. Understand one thing about your gray matter. It hates orphaned information. If you learn an isolated fact, let's say the definition of mitochondria, and you don't connect it to anything, your brain looks at it and says, This connects to nothing I already know, therefore it's trash. And poof, it disappears in less than a minute. Deep processing is the deliberate act of stitching new information into the fabric of what you already know. It's not about memorizing, it's about integrating. Imagine that your knowledge is a giant spider web. The amateur student tries to glue a speck of dust in the air with no thread attached. The genius pulls a thread from the existing web and ties it to the new information. He asks, "How is this similar to what I saw yesterday? How is this different from what I expected? If this is true, what else must be true? Do you want to know if you are really learning or just wasting time? Turn on your radar for isolated versus integrated. If you are reading and thinking, okay, got the definition, next, you are in isolated mode. You are digging your own intellectual grave. Integrated mode is loud, it's chaotic. You stop and think, wait, this works exactly like the water pressure in the pipes at my house. In that moment, when you create an analogy, when you translate the complex into the simple, you created a physical hook in your brain. You transformed a loose piece of data into a robust knowledge schema. That's why I always say, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you didn't understand it, because explaining requires you to connect the new idea to concepts she already has. But I'm going to be honest with you. This hurts. Deep processing is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. Your brain is going to want to go back to the comfort of just highlighting the text and passively rereading. Resisting that comfort is what separates the curious from the mediocre. You are building mental muscles, and there is no hypertrophy without sweat. Now, you can have the right mindset, the perfect environment, and be willing to process deeply. But how do you guarantee you aren't kidding yourself along the way? How do you know if your brilliant analogy isn't actually complete nonsense? You need a real-time quality control system. You need to be the manager of your own mental factory. And this is where most people smash their faces against the wall, because the fourth dimension is missing. You are there, sweating bullets, trying to connect the dots, creating analogies, forcing your brain out of its comfort zone. Great, but who is in command? Who is checking if you aren't just running in circles with great intensity? Most of you study like a broken robot that hits a wall, backs up, and hits the same wall again, only harder, hoping the wall will move. That's not persistence, it's insanity. To learn faster than anyone else, you need to develop a dual personality. You need to be the student who is learning and at the same time the cruel scientist observing that student with a clipboard in hand. We enter the fourth dimension, self-regulation. It is the ability to monitor your own thinking in real time and, most importantly, have the courage to change course when the ship is sinking. Most people have a primitive adjustment strategy. Oh, I did poorly on the test? I'll study more hours. Wrong. More hours doing the wrong thing just creates a more consolidated mistake. Self-regulation requires a constant three-step cycle: cue, monitoring, and adjusting. You are reading a complex text. Suddenly, your eyes pass over 3 paragraphs and you absorbed nothing. That is the cue. The mediocre student ignores the cue and keeps reading, praying for a miracle. The elite student monitors. Whoops, my brain turned off. Passive mode took over. And then he makes the adjustment. He doesn't keep reading, he stops. He changes the technique. Reading isn't working. I'm going to draw a diagram. I'm going to try to explain it out loud to the wall. I'm going to ask the book a question. He changes tactics until deep processing starts happening again. But here is the deadly trap where most of you will fall. And I need you to pay double attention now. There is a treacherous phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When you start self-regulating, when you realize your passive reading is garbage and decide to switch to an active technique, like trying to explain the concept without looking, my favorite, do you know what will happen? It's going to seem harder. It's going to seem like you're learning less because you're struggling more. And your brain, lazy as it is, will scream, "Hey, this is too hard. It must be wrong. Let's go back to highlighting text. That felt nicer." If you listen to that voice, you've lost. The difficulty isn't a sign that you are failing. It is physical proof that you are learning. If you change your technique and feel like your brain is frying, congratulations, you just found the way. Don't retreat to comfort. Self-regulation is the discipline of feeling the discomfort of inefficiency, adjusting to a harder technique, and enduring the pain of growth. You need to be ruthless with your own method. Don't fall in love with the way you study. Fall in love with understanding. If a tool doesn't work, throw it out and grab another. Test, fail, adjust, repeat. If you do this, you stop being a passive passenger in your education and become the pilot. But even if you have the mindset, the focus, the deep processing, and the self-regulation, there is a final villain, a silent thief that steals everything you've achieved while you sleep. You can understand everything today, be an absolute genius at 10 p.m., and wake up tomorrow a complete ignoramus. And it's not your fault, it's biology. But there is a way to hack this too. The villain I mentioned? His name is decay. It is the law of entropy applied to your memory. You built that beautiful house of cards of knowledge last night, and this morning, the wind blew and half of it fell. This is biological. It is inevitable. As soon as you learn something, that information begins to fade. Your brain is a machine of efficiency. It doesn't want to waste energy maintaining neural connections for information you don't use, so it cleans house. And if you do nothing, you are going to spend your whole life filling a leaky bucket, learning and forgetting, in an eternal cycle of mediocrity. How do we stop this bleeding? We enter the fifth and final dimension, the one that guarantees knowledge stays, retrieval. And please, for the love of physics, do not confuse this with reviewing. Reviewing, for most of you, is scanning your colorful notes and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this." Lie. You don't remember. You just recognize. Recognizing is passive and easy. Retrieving is active and painful. Retrieving is closing the book, looking at the ceiling, ignoring your notes, and forcing your brain to reconstruct the concept from scratch. It is dragging the information out of long-term memory. It is the difference between looking at the answer to a math equation and thinking you understood it, versus having a blank sheet in front of you and having to solve the equation yourself. The secret here is timing. If you try to retrieve 5 seconds after reading, it's too easy. It doesn't count. You need to let the forgetting start to act. You need to let the rust set in a little. This is what we call spaced retrieval. You learn today, try to remember tomorrow. It's going to be hard. You will stutter. But when you manage to pull that information back from the depths, you send a powerful chemical signal to your brain. Hey, stop! Don't throw this away. I need this. You reset the forgetting curve, and every time you do this, the memory decays more slowly. You are literally refilling the memory before it empties. But there is a final trap for those who think they are clever. Don't be a flashcard robot. Many of you fall into the error of practicing retrieval in an isolated way. You memorize definitions like parrots. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Great. You memorize the phrase. But if I give you a complex biology problem where cellular energy is the key, you freeze. Why? Because you practiced isolated retrieval, not integrated retrieval. The golden rule is, practice how you play. If in the real world, or on your exam, you need to solve problems, it's useless to practice reciting definitions. You need to retrieve knowledge by applying it. Mix up the subjects. Use interleaving. Attack the problem from different angles. Force your brain to not just remember what it is, but where and how to use it. Now you have the complete map. You have the 5 keys. But having the treasure map doesn't make you rich if you don't start digging. And most of you, unfortunately, love collecting maps and hate picking up the shovel. Mindset to accept the mistake. Self-management to create the space. Deep processing to weave the web. Self-regulation to pilot the process. And retrieval to beat time. But let me tell you one last inconvenient truth, perhaps the most important of all. Knowing how the engine works doesn't make the car go. You can watch this video 100 times. You can tattoo deep processing on your forehead. But if you don't close this tab right now and go there, in the silence, to fight against the confusion and the urge to give up, nothing will change. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Do not confuse the familiarity of watching a video with real understanding. Nature cannot be fooled. Your brain cannot be cheated. Either you build the connections or you have nothing. If you made it this far, if you endured the complexity and are willing to embrace the discomfort, you are already part of an absolute minority. Prove it now. I want you to make a brutal diagnosis of yourself right here and now. Which of these 5 dimensions is your anchor? What is your speed limiter? Is it the fragile mindset? Is it the lack of focus? Is it shallow studying? Comment below with the exact phrase, "My limiter is," and complete it with the dimension you are going to destroy starting today. Make it public. Commit to it. Most people will close this video and go back to the comfort of the shallow, of the illusion of competence. They will continue studying a lot and learning little, frustrated, blaming a lack of talent, but not you. Now you know that talent is a lie. What exists is the method. You have the choice to step out of the cave. Learning to learn is the superpower that makes all other superpowers possible. If you master this, there is no book too hard. There is no concept too complex. The whole world opens up for you to play. And if this spark lit something inside you, if you felt that tingle of curiosity you haven't felt in a long time, smash the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you value depth in a world addicted to superficiality. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the universe of knowledge without training wheels. Class is dismissed. Now, the real work.
What if I told you that the only thing separating you from mastering any subject is not intelligence, but the way you learn? Most people believe that learning means memorizing facts or cramming information into their heads. But great minds know something different. There is a technique so simple it almost feels obvious, yet it forces the brain to absorb and truly understand knowledge at a level few people ever reach. Think about this. Someone who unraveled some of the greatest mysteries of modern physics wasn't known for making things complicated, but for making them simple. His ability was so rare that he could explain the most complex phenomena of nature as if he were telling a story to a child. And that's exactly where the secret lies. Mastery doesn't depend on raw genius, but on a mental process so powerful that anyone can apply it. And here's the surprising truth. You can use this exact method to learn absolutely anything you want. Languages, science, business, skills that today might seem impossible to you. The secret isn't endless hours of blind effort or constant memorization. The secret is forcing your mind to reorganize information in a way that it can never forget. In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to apply the most powerful learning technique in the world. And by the end, you'll realize that your brain is not just a storage box for facts, but a living machine designed to simplify, connect, and create meaning. And once you learn how to use it, you'll discover that mastering anything isn't just possible, it's inevitable. So stay with me, because what you're about to learn may change not only how you study, but how you see your own potential. Let's begin. Now imagine you're facing a difficult subject. It could be physics, math, economics, programming, a new language, anything that feels out of reach. Most people look at that challenge and think, I need to memorize all of this. But here's the first shift. Don't start with memorization, start with simplification. Choose one single concept, just one. Write down what you understood on a sheet of paper as if you were explaining it to a 7-year-old. Use simple words, short sentences, everyday examples. When you do this, something powerful happens. You force your mind to abandon complicated language and search for clarity. That's the first shock. Because as you try to simplify, you begin to uncover gaps that were hidden before. That feeling of, I think I know, disappears, and you see exactly where you don't. It's uncomfortable, but it's liberating. You're no longer fooling yourself. You're facing knowledge head on. Imagine, for example, that you're learning fractions. Instead of starting with formal definitions, you take a pizza. You explain, if I cut it into 2 equal parts, each piece is 1/2. You didn't mention numerators or denominators, but you captured the essence. It's simple, it's clear, it's memorable. And what happens here is extraordinary. When you translate the complex into the simple, your brain builds deeper connections. Information stops being something distant and becomes part of your natural vocabulary.
You may not realize it, but you are teaching yourself at the most fundamental level. This is the first step to forcing your mind to learn anything. Always begin by simplifying. Don't accept the illusion of complexity, because when you can explain something simply, it means you have truly begun to understand. Now that you've simplified the concept, it's time to take the step that separates those who merely read from those who really learn: teaching. Pay close attention here, because this is the secret. Teaching doesn't mean having a classroom, students, or a blackboard. Teaching means explaining out loud, as if you were talking to someone curious who has never heard about the subject before. It could be a friend, your phone's camera, a mirror, or even an empty chair. The important thing is to turn thought into words. When you try to teach, something magical happens. The brain is forced to organize ideas in a logical sequence, and suddenly, what seemed clear in your mind starts to fall apart. You hesitate, forget a part, can't find the right words. That moment is not failure. It's the exact point where learning happens. It's the moment when the illusion of knowledge dissolves and your mind reveals its gaps. Instead of running from this discomfort, dive into it. Every time you try to teach and realize you can't, you've received a gift. You've discovered the hole in your understanding. And only when you see that hole can you fill it. Think about how children tell stories. They aren't afraid to stumble, invent words, or repeat themselves. And precisely because of that, they learn so fast. When you put yourself in that role, teaching something you don't yet fully master, you activate the same natural mechanism of accelerated learning. This is the second step. Teach in order to learn. The more you teach, the more you understand. Knowledge doesn't solidify inside your head through silent reading, but through the noise of your own words. Speaking organizes, clarifies, and locks it in. Remember, you're not teaching to impress, you're teaching to discover. Because with every explanation, your mind rebuilds itself, and what once seemed unreachable begins to become part of you. You simplified, you tried to teach, and in the process you found gaps. The next step is to return to the material, review it, and simplify again. This cycle is what forces your mind to transform information into true knowledge. Here's a practical example. Imagine you're learning about gravity. At first you write, "Gravity is the force that attracts bodies to one another, proportional to their mass and inversely proportional to the square of the distance." It sounds fancy, it sounds technical, but did you really understand it? Now, try to explain it to a child. Gravity is like an invisible magnet that pulls everything downward. The bigger the object, the stronger the pull. That's why the Earth keeps the Moon orbiting around it. Done. Instead of a complicated definition, you now have a simple mental image. That is the power of review. You take what you couldn't explain well, go back to the source, find the new example, swap difficult language for simple images, and then try again. It's like polishing a rough stone until it becomes a diamond. And here's the key. Every time you review and simplify, your mind reorganizes itself. What used to be fragile becomes solid. What used to be a memorized sentence becomes real understanding. You no longer rely on parroting, because now you understand. This is the third step to forcing your mind to learn anything. Review until you can explain it simply. Because only when you can say it in clear words have you truly learned it. If you've simplified, taught, and reviewed, you're already far ahead of most people. But there's still a higher level, creative repetition. It's not repeating for the sake of repeating. It's repeating in different ways, as if you were playing with the knowledge. The brain loves variety. When you present the same idea from different angles, you build multiple connections. It's like reinforcing a bridge with many pillars. The more angles, the stronger the understanding. Here are clear examples. You learned about electricity. After simplifying and reviewing, tell the same explanation 3 ways. First with wires and light bulbs, then by comparing it to water flowing through pipes, and finally by sketching it on paper. Each version locks in a different piece of the concept. Studying history? Don't just recite dates. Turn it into a story. A hungry people overthrowing an unjust king, the French Revolution. Then tell it as a stage play. Then as a newspaper headline. Learning a language? Explain the same sentence in different contexts. See the pattern? The content stays the same, but the form changes. That shift forces the brain to create new links. The result? You don't just understand, you become able to use the knowledge in any situation. And here's the detail almost no one notices. When you play with learning, the brain treats it as pleasure. Pleasure activates memory systems far more strongly than obligation. That's why children learn by playing. They're not just accumulating, they're enjoying. So the fourth step is this. Don't be a mechanical repeater. Be a creator of versions. Each new way of explaining is a layer of cement that sets the knowledge permanently. But now pay close attention, because there's a moment when many people quit. Error. You try to simplify, explain, review, and you still stumble. The words don't come out. The logic slips. The explanation fails. Most people take that as a sign of failure, but the truth is exactly the opposite. Error is the compass that points the way to real learning. Think about it. When you make a mistake, it doesn't mean you know nothing. It means you found the exact point where your mind hasn't yet built a solid bridge. And that's precisely where you should work. The error isn't an obstacle, it's the map. Imagine you're studying probability. You try to explain why the chance of getting heads or tails is 50%. The first time, you say, because there are two options, and one of them has to happen. It sounds logical, but it's incomplete. When you stumble, you realize you need to understand more about independent events. The mistake exposed the gap. Now, when you review, you come back stronger, and your explanation evolves. A coin has no memory. Each toss is independent, which is why the chance is always 50-50. Another example. You try to explain photosynthesis and forget to mention sunlight. In the discomfort of that mistake, you're forced to review. Next time, you never forget again, because the failure became a permanent mark of memory.
And here's the key. Every mistake is a rehearsal. The more you stumble while explaining, the more raw material you have to turn into clarity. It's like a sculptor who, with each wrong strike, discovers the outline of the stone until the figure emerges. When treated with intelligence, error becomes a trigger for progress. But to achieve that, you need a scientific attitude, curiosity instead of judgment. Ask yourself, what exactly caused me to get this wrong? By answering, you strengthen the very connection that was weak before. This is the fifth step. Don't fear mistakes. Embrace them. They don't prove your inability. They prove you're pushing the limits of your mind. And it's at those limits that true learning happens. Now, to lock this in your mind, type in the comments, I choose to learn without limits. This isn't just a comment. It's your commitment to your own mind. When you write it down, you send a direct command to your brain and it begins working in your favor. Think of it as the first step in your reprogramming, declaring to yourself that there are no barriers to what you can learn. Now you already know the path. Simplify, teach, review, play, and turn mistakes into tools. These are the steps that force the mind to learn anything. But there's one last ingredient that can't be ignored: hard work. Yes, there is method. Yes, there is technique. But without real effort, nothing grows. The brain is like a muscle. It must be strained. It needs resistance to develop. There is no genius without discipline. The truth is that every great mind worked hard, harder than most thought possible. And that's what gave power to the method. What changes when you apply this formula is that effort stops being empty. You no longer spend hours lost in underlines or meaningless repetition. Every attempt to explain, every corrected mistake, every creative review builds a solid step. And step by step, you climb until you master the impossible. In the end, the formula is simple but powerful. Simplify, teach, review, play, fail. And above all, work hard. There is no magic trick. There is discipline. There is method. And there is you putting it all into practice. When you commit, the impossible starts to feel inevitable. Because the mind, when forced the right way, expands. And a mind that expands never returns to its original size. So here's the challenge. Choose a topic today, any topic. Take a sheet of paper, simplify it, explain it, review it, play with it, embrace the mistakes, and do it with discipline every day. You'll discover in practice that there are no limits for someone who works hard with intelligence. This is the real secret.
It's not just studying. It's studying the right way with enough intensity to turn your mind into an unstoppable force. If this video opened your mind, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next lessons. And tell me in the comments, what's the first thing you're going to try to learn using this technique? I read every comment. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay well, and see you in the next video.